So, I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I've been thinking a lot about how do we learn? Like, how does learning happen, and what are some of the invisible or unseen processes that make learning possible? I've been just thinking a lot about this because I teach the Bible, right? And so I'm not that interested in people, just downloading a bunch of data and passing a test and moving on, information in one ear, out the other. But I'm interested, how does the information get in us and get used and lived out? How does it just come in and through us? Right? I've just been thinking a lot about this because in the classroom, I feel like when I'm with people in person, I feel like I know how to do this. I mean, I can't make anybody learn or make anybody be transformed, but I feel like I know how to set it up, right? I feel like, when students come into the classroom, you get to know them, you tell them the truth. You share not just the good parts of you, but you share the truth about like what's going on in your life. We get to know each other, and then we can start having conversations and we can develop dialogues. There can be challenges or assignments that really push and stretch you. There becomes these moments where we're not only just talking about things that I want to talk about, but things that they want to talk about. And we engage in this process of learning how to wrestle with God and scriptures. And there's curiosity and there's hunger and like there's learning from the students. And honestly, when it's done right, I learn too. Like, I love that process of learning. That's actually, I took one of my a Strengths Finders assessment, and one of my things about me is I love to learn. And so like learning just is so interesting to me. And it's interesting right now when we're doing distance learning, online classes. Because I'm trying to figure out how do we get people to learn when I just exist on their screen? When I am a series of emails or message boards or YouTube videos? Is that the same thing? But we're coming back to the same question. How do we learn it all? How does learning work? And is it a relational dynamic between people? And do we need to know each other personally for it to work? How do we learn? How do these things come within us, and how do we grow? I suppose I'm thinking about this a little bit this week, not only because my online classes are starting soon, but also because I had an experience this Sunday at church. No, I did not go to a church or break into a church. I was sitting on my couch with my family, watching church, doing church, whatever that means. And we're watching a live cast of our regular pastor and a sermon series. And so there's a lot of things that are very similar to what we used to have when we went to the church building and sat in the church building and saw the sermon. There's a lot that's the same. It's the same guy. It's the same kind of message. He has the same mannerisms and stories. And so there's a lot that's similar. It just happens that I'm watching this on a screen, right? And so for me, I'm kind of engaged. I'm giving it the benefit of the doubt. I'm looking forward for the encouragement. And so there's a lot that's the same. But I'm watching my kids. My two boys, Tristan and Caden, are sitting there. And I'll tell you what, they were not receiving this message at all. They looked incredibly bored. They were distracted. And I know that you're thinking, well, maybe young boys, that's a thing. But when we go to church, they seem to engage. We can discuss it on the way home. But watching the screen, it had a different impact on them. And all of a sudden, in the middle of church, I'm wondering, why is this not working? Why is this not a good substitute? I mean, there's times I go to church, I don't really talk to anybody. We sit in the back sometimes. If I walk in with my family, sit in the back, I don't talk to anybody, we don't shake any hands. And so it is just me watching worship and a message. Then why, when I do that on my living room couch, is it not at all the same? Is there something about learning here? So, as an online teacher, I've been thinking about this experiment. If I teach Bible study methods on Corban's campus with a classroom of students, and at the same time, I teach the same class with the same book to different students in an online format. Both use the same book, both have the same assignments, and I'll even try to artificially have the same kinds of conversations. what do you think the differences would be in learning? Not only like who can pass the test or who can put out a good paper, but if I were to somehow know how did this material impact your life, long term, if I could measure that, do you think that those people who sat in class would have a different experience than those people who were in the online environment? And why? Because we're trying to get at what this learning thing is. And are we realizing maybe that learning involves a relational connection and it involves something about, I guess, maybe the challenge of being close to people in a room and needing to write papers and seeing each other's faces? Is there something about that? Because I was trying to think about what an online discussion board is, where you have to post a topic, answer a question, respond to students. And I was thinking, what is the classroom equivalent of a discussion board? So I imagined this empty classroom, right? And there's one kid sitting at a desk and he's got a book open. He reads the chapter and he goes up to the front of the classroom. He goes up to the board and the question's on the board, just a weekly question. And he writes his answer on the board, right? And then he leaves. And then hours later, another student comes in and sits down at the same desk with the same book. They read the chapter. They see the question. They see that the student who they don't really know, some student with a name wrote an answer. And so they come up and they write their answer. And on this goes, and on this goes. And that's what some of the online learning feels like. We're reading the book. We're having a discussion. But is it really? How do we learn, and what are the ingredients that are involved? So I've been thinking about learning, right? And how do we learn? And this is an important question because right now I'm learning a language. I'm studying Bahasa Indonesia because I'm hoping to maybe move there in August and for a job. Long story. But anyway, I'm learning this language, right? And I'm trying to figure out, how is this not like, I don't want to make this like studying for a test where you cram really hard and it's in your short-term memory and you don't look at it for a week and it's gone. Like, how do you get the language in you, right? And this reminds me of a story I heard at a Bible department meeting that Greg Troll was telling us, and I think I was sitting next to Annette Harrison, Dr. Harrison, and he was telling us about this Jerusalem Bible school that was taking translators from all over the world, people who are going to be Bible translators, but they don't know biblical Hebrew or biblical Greek. And they'd come to Jerusalem for this 6-month course. And in 6 months, they not only knew Hebrew well and could speak it fluently, but they would all be able to translate into their own native languages. And I remember hearing about this and being like, what? How is that possible? I took 3 years of Spanish and I never got fluent, and I don't think I could translate much texts. How did they do that? Well, so as it turns out, there's a big difference between what they call language learning and language acquisition. Language learning is what happens when you want to take a second language usually. And that involves you studying about a language. It involves you, making flashcards, reading grammar books, and trying to repeat sentences and repeat phrases. And you're just basically trying to memorize the language word by word, phrase by phrase, all the way through worksheets kind of a way. But what they've realized is while this is a way that we learn second languages, nobody learns language that way. Your first language is acquired, language acquisition, and it's actually less about you learning the grammar or memorizing wooden sentences that you use at the right time. It's a lot more about being immersed, being around it, and trying to form original thoughts with the language. And so it just occurred to me that if I have these two options of practicing Bahasa Indonesia right now, what's going to be more effective? Flipping flashcards or calling Deswan or Korwa or Milda or Fitri and just asking them, just trying to have a conversation? You see, there's something about immersion, and there's something about, I think, relationship. I think that's why babies learn languages. I think that's part of the reason why babies learn languages so rapidly is that they desire to communicate. A similar thing happens to me when I was in Mexico one summer. While I had a basic proficiency in Spanish, I stayed in Mexico for a summer and was a translator for this missionary group. And I remember being dropped off at this church, and the guy who dropped me off, only guy who knew English, said he'd be back in a couple of days and just hang out, lay low, and talk to the family. And he left me there. And I remember me realizing that all these flashcards, these quizzes that I took in high school Spanish, it's now time to really try it. And I wonder if there's something about learning here, that there's something about having to do it in the real world, and there's something about wanting to do it because there's people that I want to engage with that maybe makes learning happen. And this brings me right back to our conversation about online learning and our conversation maybe about how does the church affect learning. I think there's something here. Well, let's think about the methods that Jesus used in teaching and instructing people. As we know, Jesus had disciples, and his disciples were with him. They were learning on the job. And as Mike Breen points out in his book, Building a Discipleship Culture, he would tell you that Jesus had phases in which he developed his disciples, that in the beginning they were mostly just watching, and then they were somewhat helping him along in the process, and then towards the end he gave them real responsibilities to go preach, to cast out demons, and they came back and reported back, and Jesus had this way of training them through not only them seeing and listening, but them getting involved, and it speaks to me again of this immersion, this challenge, dialogue, this engagement that I think we really want in our learning. And for Jesus, this goes all the way back to his childhood. You see, growing up as a Jew, it was the responsibility of the parents to theologically educate their children. We remember Deuteronomy 6, the Shema passage, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one." Well, right beneath that in verse 6, it says, "These words I command you today shall be on your heart." They need to get within you. This is the learning stuff we've been talking about. "You shall teach them diligently to your children." Yeah, you got to pass this on to your kids. And and you shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand. They shall be as frontlets before your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and gates. These things were supposed to surround their life. It wasn't that you had a daily lesson. It was that all the time these things were supposed to be talked about. And so Jesus grew up in a family structure with Mary and Joseph. And yes, he had younger siblings where he was taught to know the Lord in the home. He certainly went to synagogue. He certainly went to hear the scriptures. He certainly had an education, maybe even a formal education in learning scriptures. But he was always surrounded by this learning dynamic in their lifestyle, even in the home. This is what Hunter Krallman calls in his book, Mentoring for Mission, he calls witness. Discipleship is witness. Being with somebody, learning on the job so that you can see, so that you can hear, so that you can touch, and so that you can do it with them and eventually be sent by them. I wonder how this impacts really our view of education and being with students and the possibility of being with students digitally. How does this affect how we see the church and what the church should be doing? Because see, this is pretty interesting. If you want to, and the church and school are not exactly the same thing, obviously, but if you want to just for a moment get a fresh look at the church, think about the church as an educational system, as something that's trying to promote learning and transformation of the scripture. And think of it this way, the church in some ways can, not always, but it can function like a class with lectures and no tests, no quizzes, no assignments. Just you show up and you hear, and it's assumed that this gets in you and you go do something about it. Can you imagine that? A class that's all lectures, that there's no tests, there's no assignments, and there's really no grade. Now, I know what you're thinking. Some of you be like, do you really want the church to start grading you? And I don't know, but I do know that if I want to really be grown and transformed, it would be nice for someone to challenge me, for someone to push me and to hold me accountable. I mean, certainly I can go to church and listen to a message and set my own challenges and I guess meet them, but there's not that witness dynamic of somebody not only instructing me, but walking with me in how to do it and giving me feedback on it and improving that task. I mean, can you imagine that? Where you go to a church And there is this teaching, there is even a lecture. Let's just say it's a lecture, but the next week you come back, it was assumed that you went out and lived these things, and people asked you, how did it go? And you had to stand up and give a report, whether that report was, I did great, it went well, or whether your report was, man, it was miserable and I did awful. But there would be this accountability. There would be this almost assignment mentality. Maybe some of the problems we're facing, maybe with church, or maybe even our thoughts about chapel, is that when we engage learning, there needs to be real challenge, there needs to be involvement, and there needs to be some witness. I've been doing all this thinking about learning, and I've been talking with Kent Kersey and some others, and this is now coming all the way back to chapel. And as you heard, we're talking about doing a chapalogue. And one of the reasons that we're talking about doing a chapalogue is we just don't want to put out tons of videos and us on screens, because you know what I imagine? Is I imagine you're like my children watching church and you're bored and you're, let's, fast forward, let's move on, let's be done. And I don't like that either. I like the idea of us engaging you, but how do you engage when you're stuck behind a screen, when we're quarantined away, or at least off for distance in the summer? It became about how do we create interaction and how can we be a part of witness, even digitally. And so we've created a chapalogue, and the idea is that this would assist us in a discipleship lifestyle of learning how to live out the way of Jesus. And this wouldn't just be so much about, lots of videos or information, obviously, but it would be about taking some things and trying to live them out over the summer. We are embarking on a journey to bring you a chapalogue series that moves through the summer and actually asks you for engagement. And so how is that going to work? Well, okay, so here we go. What we're going to attempt to accomplish for the whole summer, the goal of our chapalogue is that we would learn how to live in the discipleship lifestyle, that we would take concrete steps of action, that we'd create places for students to engage. So our goal is for us to live out the discipleship lifestyle together. Well, how are we going to do that? Well, I suppose we're going to offer 4 things. The first thing is we're going to release a content video, just like the one that you're watching, to start a conversation. Maybe we'll be calling it the jumping off point. And it's just getting a little bit of information out there. Sometimes I'll be on them, sometimes Kent will, or where you can, we're going to be maybe asking some other Corban favorites to get involved as well. But we're going to create a jumping off point video on this journey of discipleship, okay? And after that, we're going to create 3 ways for you to engage that topic. And these are meant to be sequential, going in order or consecutive, and kind of building maybe like an easy, medium, and hard kind of challenge, concrete steps to take. And so in this first chapalogue, where I've kind of introduced the topic of learning and the need for immersion and action and challenge and this interpersonal dynamic, we want to create that as best as we can digitally. And so we're going to introduce you to our interface here on this other screen at ThingLink. And so over here, on this first chapalogue page, there is a video that you can watch, and I'm assuming that's the video that you're watching right now. But the first way that you can engage this after watching the video and accepting the challenge to action and to community action is to come over here to this green link and go to the study word engagement. You see, in discipling or apprenticing or learning how to do something, whether that something is playing music, learning a language, there needs to be some kind of study element. And so on the study element, we have word engagement. And you're going to head over to Padlet for the study step challenge, and you're going to write out your thoughts. So let's head over to Padlet right now, which is something, of course, you can do. And on this page, we have this week's study step. Step 1, there's going to be studying. And it's going to be reading Mark 1 through 9, chapters 1 through 9, to see what the discipleship lifestyle looks like. What does it look like to follow Jesus? Well, one of those ways that we can engage this topic is, of course, by you independently reading. This is just the starting point, though, of getting some content. And after reading Mark 1 through 9, it's really easy. Double-click to add your thoughts anywhere.
You can add your thoughts from the week, whether it's about being with Jesus or whether it's about healing or steps of faith. And feel free to just write out what you got from your reading and how it interacts with you in the discipleship lifestyle. And the beautiful thing could be that a number of people will add their thoughts. Some of us, maybe even professors, will get involved and add some responses. And we'll be starting this learning community. We'll be starting this dialogue on the topic of following Jesus, the challenges, the highs, the lows, and we'll start interacting with it that way. That would be step one for engagement. Well, coming back to our page here, step two, moving on from the green book, we'll be going over to this video icon here. And this is the practice challenge, putting something into practice. So at this point, hopefully you've watched the video, of course, that you are watching right now. Check. Hopefully you've read Mark 1 through 9 and you've kind of got some preliminary thoughts on it and put it on Padlet, or maybe you've just interacted with other people's thoughts. Well, now we're going to move into practicing, and practicing is going to be through video. And so we're going to use Flipgrid, which if you haven't used Flipgrid is basically just Video Marco Polo. And we're going to head over to Flipgrid. And it's going to ask you for your Corban login credentials. And that's to make sure that this is a closed system, that no one's involved in this. And so it's going to redirect you to asking, some specific questions, yada, yada, yada. I'm going to type in my password here, hopefully. Oh, I'm already logged in, so I'm going to stay signed in, yes. And here's what you're going to see. You're going to come to our Flipgrid Chapalogue page, moving from passive listening to active engagement. Well, here's our week 1 topic. What is one practical step you need to take in your faith that you plan to work on this week in response to reading? If you scroll down, I've made a video here. You can click the green plus sign, and you can also record your video. You've got 2 minutes to tell the world, and by the world we mean the Corban world, what is some step of faith that you need to take in your discipleship journey? Now, for this first week, we don't have a lot of content or concrete practical steps, but maybe in Mark 1 through 9 you saw something. Well, why don't you make a quick video? You can use your phone or webcam. Just let us know what it is you want to do. And the reason you're doing that is so that we can create an accountability culture, a challenge culture. Maybe you should call out some other people in your life to make similar videos. But let's get the dialogue going. What is it that we want to do to take action to get the truth inside of us? And yes, there is one more way to engage later in the week, and that's over here. You can see the Twitter, Instagram button. Basically, we've created a hashtag for you to share what you did and how it's going. This would be further along in the week, the Chapalogue share, the third step of engagement. But if you are not a social media person, or you want, I guess, even more personal connection, we are going to have a live stream event with StreamYard, and we are projecting it to be Wednesday, May 13th. And this will be something that Kent and I will be on. We're hoping to have a couple of special guests. And the purpose of this is not to say the same things that we've said in this video. The purpose of this is for students to be admitted into the live stream, like joining the panel, and tell us your stories. How did it go to begin a discipleship journey this week? I know that all of us have been on a discipleship journey for pretty much most of our adult Christian lives, but as you saw this video, as you read Mark 1 through 9, as you posted your Flipgrid and took the challenge up, what are you noticing? Where do you get stuck? This can be a questions and answers space. But again, the whole idea of this interface and this Chapalogue isn't more busyness, it's not more videos, it's how can we live this out, how can we take steps, and how can this get in us, and how can we grow and learn? The goal is, of course, growing into Christ-likeness, and the journey begins today. So what are you going to do? You've got this far in the video. What are we, like 20 minutes in? Goodness. But what are you going to do? Will you get on to the Padlet page? Will you read Mark 1 through 9 and record your thoughts? Will you have the courage to upload a Flipgrid video? I know some people hate making videos of themselves, but will you take the challenge? Can we build a culture of moving towards immersion and application and challenge? Can we aim for transformation? Will we see you at the live stream? Let's hope so. Brothers and sisters, thanks for kind of tuning into this video and starting this journey with me. I know it's summer and you're like, I'm done. I don't need to do Corban stuff anymore. But Kent Kersey and others and I have been talking about learning, transformation, and helping people grow, especially over this summer. And so we're glad you're on board. Will you take action? I hope to see. Thanks, everybody.